They judged him the moment he walked in. When Elijah Kingsley entered the exclusive first-class lounge, the whispers started. The smirks. The quiet laughter. To them, he was an outsider, a nobody who didn't belong among the elite. But they had no idea who he really was. What started as a moment of humiliation would soon turn into a battle for power, respect, and the future of luxury travel. In the boardroom, corporate giants questioned his ability to lead. In the shadows, a rival airline prepared to steal everything he was building. And in just 3 months, Elijah would have to prove himself or risk losing it all. If you love cinematic storytelling, high-stakes drama, and the thrill of a mastermind at work, subscribe now. More incredible stories are on the way. The scent of freshly brewed espresso and polished leather filled the air as Elijah walked toward the check-in desk. The opulence of the Kingsley Aviation Lounge was undeniable: crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and the soft hum of conversations between those who lived their lives at 35,000 feet. Elijah was used to wealth. He had grown up in its shadow, accustomed to private jets and boardroom meetings before he was even a teenager. But today, he wasn't here as a name on a corporate plaque. Today, he was just a young man, dressed in an understated navy suit, carrying a first-class ticket in his pocket. Yet, from the moment he approached the front desk, the reception was anything but welcoming. The woman behind the counter, a senior concierge with years of experience serving high-profile clients, glanced at him and immediately stiffened. Her practiced smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she composed herself. "Excuse me, sir," she said, voice laced with forced politeness. "This lounge is for first-class passengers only." Elijah didn't blink. "I know." Her gaze flicked over him, from the well-fitted suit to his polished shoes. But it wasn't his attire she questioned, it was him. "Your ticket, please." Elijah reached into his pocket, pulled out the pristine boarding pass, and placed it on the counter. The woman's expression remained neutral as she scanned the details, but when she saw the seat number, her lips tightened. "Who booked this for you?" Elijah met her gaze evenly. "I did." A soft scoff came from behind. Turning slightly, Elijah spotted a well-dressed older gentleman's salt and pepper hair, gold cufflinks, the kind of effortless arrogance that came from years of power. "Unbelievable," the man muttered to a group of equally well-heeled travelers. "Nowadays anyone can pretend to be first class." A sleekly dressed woman beside him let out a low chuckle. "Must be a TikTok stunt. Or maybe a gift from a generous sponsor." Laughter rippled through the group. Elijah remained still. He had encountered this before: assumptions, skepticism, quiet derision. But today, he wasn't in the mood to let it slide. Before he could respond, the concierge's voice cut through the moment. "There seems to be a verification issue with your ticket, sir," she said, looking down at the screen. "I'll need to confirm some details." Elijah exhaled slowly. He wasn't surprised. The first test had begun, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. Elijah's fingers tapped rhythmically against the polished counter as the concierge continued scrutinizing his boarding pass. The soft hum of the lounge persisted, but now a few more heads turned in subtle curiosity. "Verification issue?" Elijah repeated, his voice calm but firm. "What kind of issue?" The concierge hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough for Elijah to notice. "We've had reports of unauthorized ticket transfers," she said smoothly. "We just need to confirm." "You mean you need to confirm whether I should be allowed in here?" The accusation hung in the air like an unspoken truth. The concierge stiffened but didn't deny it. Behind him, the older businessman, his name tag read Richard Langley, chuckled under his breath. "Poor kid. Must be embarrassing." His companions smirked, their eyes gleaming with amusement. One of them, a younger executive in an impeccable gray suit, leaned in and whispered, "Watch. They're going to call security." Elijah remained unfazed. He had learned long ago that wealth didn't always command respect, perception did. And right now, to them, he was an outsider pretending to belong. The concierge tapped something into her system, waiting for the verification response. A few feet away, a security officer in a Navy uniform had started moving in their direction, his radio crackling softly. Elijah sighed. This was getting predictable. Sir, the concierge continued, her tone polite but clipped. Do you have any other form of identification? Wordlessly, Elijah reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out his passport. He placed it on the counter, flipping it open to the ID page. The concierge's fingers hesitated as she scanned the name, Elijah Kingsley. Something in her expression flickered doubt, giving way to recognition, then disbelief. Her eyes darted back up, lips parting slightly, as if she had just swallowed something bitter. The security officer arrived, placing a firm hand on his belt. Is there a problem here? The concierge didn't respond immediately. The weight of realization had landed. Elijah tilted his head slightly. Go ahead, he said, his voice quiet but unwavering. Say it. The older businessman Richard scoffed. Oh, for God's sake, just kick him out already. The security officer glanced at the concierge, awaiting her direction. But she remained frozen, her mind racing. Because now she knew who Elijah Kingsley was. Not just a passenger. Not just some young man pretending to belong. Heir to Kingsley Aviation. Owner of this very lounge. Elijah held her gaze. You were saying? The color drained from her face. She inhaled sharply, forcing a smile. And my apologies, Mr. Kingsley. It seems there was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Elijah almost laughed. Richard Langley and his entourage frowned, sensing the shift in atmosphere, but not yet understanding why. Then, a voice broke through the tension. You're joking. It was the younger executive in the gray suit. He had stepped closer, squinting at the passport, as if hoping he had misread the name. Elijah's lips curved into a smile sharp, knowing. No joke, he said. Langley's eyes darted between the passport and Elijah's face, realization dawning like a storm on the horizon. His smirk vanished. The security officer straightened, suddenly stiff with caution. The entire mood of the lounge had shifted in an instant, the power dynamics flipping like a coin in freefall. The whispers began. Wait, Kingsley? As in Kingsley Aviation? That's him? Elijah finally reached forward, reclaiming his passport. He gave the concierge a small nod. I assume my verification is complete. Why, yes, of course, Mr. Kingsley, she stammered. Welcome to the lounge. Elijah took his boarding pass back, slipping it into his pocket. Richard Langley cleared his throat, attempting to recover his composure. Mr. Kingsley, Elijah turned to him, gaze impassive. You were saying something earlier about people pretending to be first class. Langley's mouth opened, but no words came. The arrogance in his posture had crumbled, replaced by something far more satisfying: silent regret. Elijah didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he turned, stepping deeper into the lounge, leaving them to choke on the bitter taste of their own judgment. He wasn't done yet. Not even close. Elijah moved through the lounge with deliberate ease, every step echoing louder than the whispers trailing behind him. The atmosphere had shifted, no longer filled with quiet derision, but with an uneasy tension. Those who had once smirked at him now avoided his gaze, as if doing so might erase their earlier judgments. But Elijah wasn't here to be forgotten. As he approached the bar, a bartender, young, slick-haired, with the confidence of someone who thought he knew everything, watched him with a smirk. The bartender's voice carried just enough amusement to invite the surrounding patrons into the joke. I thought you'd prefer something stronger. Or maybe a soda. Elijah didn't take the bait. He simply leaned against the polished counter and met the bartender's gaze with quiet authority. I'll have a fresh orange juice, he said evenly. The bartender hesitated, perhaps realizing for the first time that the usual mockery might not land as expected. Still, the smirk remained. "Of course, sir." He turned to prepare the drink, but Elijah already knew what was coming. It was a pattern test, a final attempt to remind him that no matter what, his last name was, some people would never want him to belong. As the bartender slid the glass across the counter, a hand brushed past Elijah's shoulder, knocking the drink forward. The bright orange liquid splashed across his sleeve and vest. A moment of feigned horror followed. A waitress, dark-haired, sharp-eyed, covered her mouth, eyes wide with mock remorse. "Oh dear," she gasped. "I'm so sorry. I hope that wasn't an expensive suit." Laughter rippled through a small group nearby. Langley's entourage watched, barely containing their amusement. Elijah inhaled slowly, his grip tightening around the glass. Not from anger, from calculation. The waitress expected him to react, to lash out, to demand an apology. Instead, he set the glass down carefully, then reached for a napkin. With measured patience, he dabbed at his sleeve, the movement slow, deliberate. Then he looked up, locking eyes with her. "I hope that wasn't an expensive mistake," he said smoothly. The laughter died instantly. The waitress blinked, clearly thrown off by his calmness. Elijah let the silence stretch just long enough for her to feel it. Then he turned away, unfazed, as if the incident hadn't even been worth his time. But someone else had seen enough. A deep voice cut through the tension. "That suit," the voice said, smooth, authoritative, laced with quiet power, "costs more than your salary for the year." The entire lounge turned as one. A man stepped forward from the far corner of the room, a man who had been watching from the shadows, unnoticed until now. He wore a tailored black suit, his presence effortlessly commanding. As he removed his dark sunglasses, sharp eyes scanned the room with quiet assessment. Recognition spread like wildfire. Jonathan Kingsley, CEO of Kingsley Aviation. Elijah's father. The silence in the lounge was deafening. The waitress paled, her lips parting slightly as panic flickered across her face. The bartender stepped back, suddenly looking anywhere but at the Kingsley patriarch. Richard Langley, who had enjoyed the spectacle only moments ago, now looked as though he wished to disappear into his leather seat. Jonathan Kingsley's gaze swept over them all before settling on Elijah. "Elijah," he said, his voice even. "Come here." Elijah walked toward him without hesitation. His father studied him briefly, his gaze flickering to the wet stain on his vest before returning to his face. Then, with the smallest tilt of his head, he gestured toward the stunned waitress and bartender. "Who did this?" The bartender immediately straightened. "Sir, Jonathan Kingsley held up a hand. The movement was subtle but final. "I wasn't talking to you." Elijah glanced back at the waitress. She swallowed hard, avoiding his gaze now. "It was an accident," she whispered, though there was no conviction in her words. Jonathan nodded slowly. "An accident," he repeated. Then, without looking away from her, he spoke to one of the nearby managers. "Effective immediately," he said, his tone cold but controlled. "This young woman will no longer be working as a server in my lounge." The waitress gasped. "Wait, sir, please, she will be reassigned," Elijah interrupted. The room stiffened. His father turned to him, raising a brow in quiet interest. Elijah met his gaze steadily. "She was testing me," he said, "and I passed. That kind of initiative, I think we need it in HR." The entire room stared. The waitress herself looked as though she had just been handed a completely different fate than the one she had been expecting. Jonathan considered his son's words for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Very well." The decision was made. The test was over. But the lesson was just beginning. As Elijah turned back to the lounge, the weight of unspoken apologies hung thick in the air. Langley and his friends looked away, pretending to be engrossed in their drinks. The bartender busied himself wiping the counter, his hands trembling slightly. Elijah let them sit in their regret. He had nothing more to say. But when he and his father left the lounge, The murmurs followed them like ghosts. That kid, he's got more presence than his father. Elijah didn't smile, but deep down he knew he had won. The sliding glass doors of the Kingsley Aviation Lounge whispered shut behind them, but the tension inside lingered like an echo. Elijah walked beside his father. Their strides matched in perfect rhythm, yet the air between them carried an unspoken weight. Jonathan Kingsley had always been a man of few words, his authority woven into every glance, every pause. His son had inherited that presence, but today, Elijah had wielded it in a way even his father hadn't expected. They passed through the pristine corridors of the private terminal, the low hum of departure announcements filling the air. Outside, beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, their family's fleet of private jets gleamed under the afternoon sun. Jonathan finally broke the silence. "You handled that well," he said, his tone neutral, but approval flickered beneath the surface. Elijah didn't respond immediately. He wasn't seeking validation. "They assumed I didn't belong," he said after a beat. "It's not the first time." Jonathan exhaled through his nose, a quiet acknowledgement. "It won't be the last." Elijah stopped walking, turning to face his father fully. "You knew this would happen." Jonathan met his gaze unreadable. "I suspected." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Then why let it play out?" A small pause. Then, Jonathan gestured toward the tarmac outside, where a Kingsley Aviation jet was being prepped for departure. "Do you see that aircraft?" he asked. Elijah glanced at it, but said nothing. "That plane carries my name. Our name. Every seat, every engine, every flight plans, it all runs, because people believe in what we've built." His gaze sharpened. "But belief is fragile. Perception is everything. If people assume you don't belong, then for all intents and purposes, you don't until you prove otherwise." Elijah's fists clenched at his sides. "I shouldn't have to prove anything." Jonathan's expression remained impassive. "And yet you did." A heavy silence stretched between them. Elijah exhaled slowly, his pulse steadying. His father wasn't wrong. The world wouldn't hand him respect just because he was a Kingsley. If anything, it would make him fight harder for it. But today, he hadn't just fought. He had won. Jonathan checked his watch, then spoke briskly. "You're coming with me." Elijah raised a brow. "Where?" "The main headquarters. There's something you need to see." He didn't wait for a response. Jonathan Kingsley wasn't a man who asked, he commanded. Elijah hesitated only for a moment before falling into step beside him. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a business trip. It was something bigger, something that would change everything. 40 minutes later, Kingsley Aviation Headquarters, the elevator ride was silent, the hum of ascent the only sound between them. When the doors finally slid open, they stepped into the top floor of the Kingsley Aviation Global Headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the sprawling skyline, the city below stretching toward the horizon. The executive floor was sleek, modern, every detail curated for power. But Elijah's attention was drawn to a single glass-walled room at the end of the corridor. Inside, a group of high-ranking executives stood around a long, polished table, their conversation hushed yet intense. Jonathan led the way, pushing the door open without hesitation. The moment he stepped inside, the executives fell silent. "Elijah," Jonathan said, his voice firm but measured, "meet the board." Elijah's eyes flickered across the room. He recognized some of the men and women who had advised his father for years, who had shaped the company's direction with their influence. A tall man in a gray suit cleared his throat. "Jonathan," he greeted before his gaze shifted to Elijah. "I assume this isn't just a social visit." Jonathan nodded once. "Elijah is here because he needs to understand what's at stake." A woman with sharp eyes leaned forward. "And what exactly is at stake?" Jonathan glanced at his son. "The future of this company." Elijah's pulse remained steady, but his mind sharpened. This wasn't just a lesson in power. This was a test. and the real battle was only beginning. Elijah kept his expression neutral, but his mind was already working at full speed. He had expected to spend his day proving himself to a room full of strangers in the Kingsley Aviation Lounge, but now he stood in a far more dangerous room, one filled with power, ambition, and unspoken agendas. The board of Kingsley Aviation. Their gazes rested on him, assessing, measuring. Some with curiosity, others with doubt. They knew who he was, of course, but knowing his name and accepting his presence were two entirely different things. Jonathan Kingsley moved to the head of the long, polished conference table, a silent command for everyone to sit. Elijah took a seat at his father's right, a position that did not go unnoticed. A tall man in a gray suit, Malcolm Reeves, the chief financial officer, was the first to speak. Jonathan, let's not waste time. What exactly is Elijah's role in this meeting? The air tightened. It wasn't just a question. It was a challenge. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, unfazed. He's here to listen and to learn. Malcolm's lips pressed into a thin line. With all due respect, this is not a classroom. We have urgent business to discuss. A woman in a navy blue suit, Isabel Chan, head of global strategy, folded her hands together. The airline industry is under pressure, she said, her voice crisp. Fuel costs are rising, international regulations are tightening, and our competitors are gaining ground. This isn't the time for, she hesitated, then continued carefully, internships. Elijah met her gaze evenly. He knew what she had wanted to say. This isn't the time for distractions, for untested airs. Jonathan remained composed, but there was a weight behind his silence. He was letting them speak first, letting them reveal their doubts before he made his move. And Elijah understood why. This wasn't just a meeting. This was a battlefield, and perception was the weapon of choice. Elijah exhaled slowly, then spoke for the first time. If the airline is under pressure, he said, his tone measured but firm, then shouldn't we be talking about solutions instead of questioning why I'm in the room? Silence. Several executives exchanged glances. Some intrigued, some skeptical. Malcolm scoffed lightly. You think solving a multi-billion-dollar industry crisis is that simple? Elijah tilted his head slightly. No, but I do know that dismissing potential ideas before hearing them is a good way to lose an empire. The room shifted. A few people straightened in their chairs. Jonathan watched the exchange carefully, but he gave no indication of approval or disapproval. This was Elijah's moment to hold or lose. Isabel leaned forward. All right, she said, her voice softer now but still sharp. Since you're so eager to be part of this discussion, tell us, what would you do? Elijah didn't hesitate. The real problem isn't just rising costs. It's loyalty. Malcolm raised a brow. Loyalty? Elijah nodded. Airlines compete on price, but price wars are a losing game. The real way to win is to create an experience passengers don't want to leave. People don't just choose an airline for cost, they choose it for consistency, reliability, and service. Isabel considered this. And you think Kingsley Aviation isn't delivering that? Elijah chose his words carefully. I think the way we define first-class service is outdated. More murmurs. A few board members looked genuinely interested now. Jonathan remained silent, watching his son with quiet intensity. Elijah continued, his confidence building. Luxury isn't just champagne and leather seats. It's about personalization. People want an airline that knows them, their preferences, their habits. They want to feel like they belong, not just like they bought a ticket. The room was silent now, listening. Imagine a system where a passenger's preferences follow them no matter where they fly. Their favorite drink waiting for them. Their preferred seat automatically selected. Personalized greetings. Seamless, invisible service that makes every flight feel like home. Isabel tapped a pen against the table. A loyalty ecosystem, she mused. Beyond just miles and points. Elijah nodded. Exactly. Malcolm crossed his arms. And what makes you think this would work? Elijah didn't miss a beat. Because people want to be seen. The words hung in the air. Because that was the heart of it, wasn't it? Today, in the lounge, they had assumed he didn't belong. They had dismissed him, judged him, underestimated him. And now, these executives were doing the same, but he had turned that moment around. He had proven his worth, not by demanding recognition, but by earning it. Jonathan finally spoke. His voice was calm, but edged with something rare approval. Elijah has a point. The weight of his words settled over the room. Jonathan Kingsley did not offer praise lightly. Malcolm adjusted his tie. Isabel tapped her fingers against the table. Other executives sat back, thoughtful. The tide was shifting. Jonathan turned to his son. Welcome to the real test. Elijah met his father's gaze. And, for the first time he understood, the lounge had been one battle. But this was the war. And he was ready for it. The weight of the moment settled over the boardroom. Elijah had spoken, his ideas laid bare before a room filled with skeptics, influencers, and power brokers. And for the first time, they listened. But listening did not mean acceptance. The silence that followed was not agreement, it was calculation. Jonathan Kingsley sat back in his chair, fingers steepled, watching the room with the patience of a man who had navigated 1,000 negotiations. His approval of Elijah's stance had been subtle, but unmistakable. And that alone was enough to shift the balance of the conversation. Still, not everyone was convinced. Malcolm Reeves, the ever-pragmatic CFO, adjusted his tie, his eyes cold and assessing. Loyalty ecosystems, personalized service, he exhaled, shaking his head slightly. Elijah, I won't deny that your ideas are interesting, but ideas don't keep a business running. Numbers do. Elijah didn't flinch. You're saying it's too expensive. Malcolm nodded. I'm saying implementing a system like this requires massive infrastructure changes, AI integration, retraining staff. And he gestured toward the room, board approval. And frankly, in the middle of an industry downturn, we can't afford unproven experiments. A few executives murmured in agreement. The resistance was taking shape. Elijah met Malcolm's gaze evenly. How much does Kingsley Aviation lose every year to customer attrition? Malcolm blinked. What? Loyal customers, Elijah continued, who switch to competitors. People who fly first class once and never come back. Passengers who drop out of our loyalty program because they don't feel valued. Do you know that number? Malcolm hesitated. $340 million. The room tensed. Elijah had done his research. I reviewed the reports before coming here, he continued, his voice unwavering. We spend millions on acquiring first-time customers, but invest almost nothing into retaining them. The real cost isn't implementing change, it's losing the people who should already be with us. A silence stretched over the table. Even Malcolm was momentarily at a loss for words. Then Isabel Chan leaned forward, intrigued. You ran an analysis on customer retention? Elijah nodded. Before I stepped into this room, I wanted to know why Kingsley Aviation is losing ground. The answer isn't just rising fuel costs or regulations. It's experience. Customers don't leave airlines because of price, they leave because they don't feel valued. We need to change that. Jonathan's gaze flickered with something unreadable. Was it approval? Amusement? Malcolm recovered quickly, shaking his head. This is all theoretical. Elijah didn't break eye contact. Then let's test it. Malcolm frowned. Excuse me? Give me 3 months, Elijah said, voice steady. A pilot program. One route. Let me prove that experience-driven loyalty works. If it fails, we shut it down. No risk to the company. No major capital loss. The room murmured again, this time with less resistance. A test run. Small scale. Measurable. It was a way to take Elijah's ideas seriously without fully committing to it. Jonathan finally spoke. "You're asking for control of a Kingsley aviation route." Elijah turned to his father. "I'm asking for a chance." A long pause. Then Jonathan leaned back, considering. "Elijah will have his 3-month trial," he declared. Malcolm tensed, but didn't argue. He had played this game long enough to know when a battle was lost. Isabel smiled slightly, clearly intrigued by the young heir's boldness. Jonathan's gaze returned to his son. "Pick your route carefully." Elijah didn't hesitate. New York to London. Another ripple of surprise moved through the room. One of the most competitive first-class routes in the world. Jonathan's lips curved just slightly. Bold, dangerous, and exactly what he would have chosen himself. "Elijah," he said, standing, "you have 3 months." The challenge was set. The test had begun. And now, Elijah had everything to prove. 3 months. That was the time Elijah had to prove himself, not just to the board, not just to his father, but to the industry itself. The New York to London route wasn't just any flight. It was a battlefield where first-class luxury was expected, where Kingsley Aviation fought against airlines like Zenith Air and Sovereign Skies for the wealthiest clientele in the world. And Elijah had just declared war. He didn't waste a second. The very next morning, he arrived at Kingsley Aviation's headquarters at dawn, stepping into the sleek offices of the Customer Experience Division. Heads turned as he walked past glass-walled conference rooms. Some employees whispered, others stared. He wasn't just the CEO's son anymore, he was the man who had dared to challenge the board. At the far end of the floor, a team was already assembled. Isabel Chan sat at the head of the table, scrolling through reports. Beside her was Darren Holt, Kingsley's Vice President of Customer Relations, a man who had spent years perfecting the illusion of premium service, but had never dared to redefine it. The moment Elijah stepped into the room, Isabel gestured to an empty chair. "Welcome to your battleground," she said. Elijah took his seat. "Let's get started." Darren folded his arms. "All right, Kingsley. You've got 3 months to prove this loyalty revolution of yours works. What's your first move?" Elijah tapped his fingers against the table. "The problem isn't the seats, the meals, or even the lounges," he said. "It's how we treat people." Darren raised a brow. "First-class passengers get champagne the moment they sit down. What more do they need?" "They need to feel seen," Elijah countered. "They need more than scripted service. They need anticipation." Isabel leaned in, intrigued. "Explain." Elijah opened his laptop and projected a slide onto the screen. It displayed a simple yet powerful idea: the passenger memory system. "Every luxury hotel in the world remembers their VIP guests," Elijah said. "Why don't we?" Darren frowned. "We have a loyalty program." "That's just miles and points," Elijah replied. "I'm talking about actual human recognition, a system where passengers don't have to ask for what they want, it's already there waiting for them." He clicked to the next slide. A case study. Billionaire tech mogul Adam Vance flies Kingsley Aviation twice a month, always books the same suite at the Four Seasons in London, prefers sparkling water, no ice, always requests a 6 a.m. landing time for morning meetings. "Now imagine," Elijah continued, "that when Adam Vance boards his flight, his seat already has his favorite sparkling water waiting for him. The in-flight team knows his morning routine and offers him a light breakfast right before landing without him having to ask." Isabel's eyes gleamed with interest. "Hyper-personalization." Elijah nodded. "We're not just selling a first-class seat. We're selling exclusivity. We're selling the feeling that Kingsley Aviation knows you better than any other airline." Darren exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "That's ambitious." "It's necessary," Elijah corrected. The room was quiet for a beat. Then Darren shook his head. "This kind of system requires real-time data tracking, AI integration, staff retraining. We're talking millions in development." Elijah didn't flinch. We start with one route. Darren sighed. Do you even have a team to implement this? Elijah leaned back in his chair. I will. The challenge was clear. If he wanted this to work, he needed the right people. And that meant looking beyond the boardrooms of Kingsley Aviation. That evening, Elijah stepped into a dimly lit lounge at the Langham Hotel, New York. The bar was quiet, filled with high-profile travelers and executives nursing drinks after long meetings. At a corner table, a woman sat alone, scrolling through data on a tablet. Naomi Carter, former director of passenger experience at Zenith Air, a woman who had once pioneered luxury innovations until Zenith cut costs and pushed her out. She didn't look up as Elijah approached. I hear you're looking for revenge, he said smoothly. Naomi smirked, finally glancing up. And I hear you're looking for an impossible miracle. Elijah slid into the seat across from her. I don't believe in miracles. I believe in execution. She studied him for a long moment, then set her tablet down. All right, Kingsley, she said, intrigued. Tell me what you need. Elijah smiled. He had found his first ally, and the revolution had begun. Naomi Carter was not easily impressed. She had spent years shaping Zenith Air's passenger experience, only to watch cost-cutting executives strip away the innovations she had fought for. She knew the industry inside and out, its strengths, its flaws, and most importantly, its resistance to change. So when Elijah Kingsley laid out his vision for a first-class revolution, she listened. Not because she believed in him yet, but because she wanted to see if he could back up his words with action. She leaned back in her chair at the Langham Hotel lounge, tapping a manicured finger against her glass. Let me get this straight, she said. You want to build a passenger memory system, retrain your staff, and overhaul the entire first-class experience for the New York to London route all in 3 months. Elijah met her gaze evenly. Yes. Naomi exhaled. You do realize that's insane? Elijah's lips curved slightly. Good. That means no one else will see it coming. A slow smile played at the edges of her mouth. Maybe this kid wasn't just another spoiled heir after all. She swirled the last of her drink. All right, Kingsley. I'm in. But if we're doing this, we're doing it my way. Elijah leaned forward. Tell me what you need. Naomi didn't hesitate. First, we need data, real, actionable insights on our top-tier passengers. Not just flight records, but preferences, habits, behavioral patterns. Elijah nodded. Done. I already have access to Kingsley's customer analytics. Naomi's brow lifted. He had come prepared. Second, she continued, we need a test crew. The current first-class staff is trained in standard hospitality. I need people who can anticipate a passenger's needs before they even realize it themselves. I'll handpick them, Elijah said. Naomi smirked. You better. Because if even one flight attendant slips back into robotic service, this whole experiment fails. She sat back, studying him. And third, I need to know how much power you actually have in this company. Elijah held her gaze. Enough. Naomi chuckled. We'll see. She extended her hand. All right, Kingsley. Let's change the future of luxury travel. Elijah shook her hand, sealing the deal. Now, the real work began. Within 48 hours, Naomi had set up a war room at Kingsley Aviation's headquarters. A sleek conference space was transformed into the nerve center of the operation, covered in data charts, staffing plans, and passenger profiles. Elijah stood at the head of the room, reviewing the team Naomi had assembled. Handpicked staff from Kingsley's existing roster, flight attendants, concierge personnel, and service managers. But not just any employees. These were the ones with instinct, the ones who could read a passenger's mood before a single word was spoken. Naomi paced in front of them. Let me be clear, she said, voice sharp. This is not standard first-class service. If you just smile and pour champagne, you've already failed. The team straightened in their seats. You are personal assistants, lifestyle managers, memory keepers, Naomi continued. By the time a passenger steps on board, you should already know if they like their coffee black or with oat milk. You should know if they prefer classical music or silence. You should anticipate jet lag recovery, hydration needs, and meal timing based on their body clock, not just the flight schedule. A young flight attendant, Sienna, raised a hand. What if a passenger changes their mind mid-flight? Naomi turned to her. Then you adjust. A passenger's behavior is fluid. That's why we don't just memorize their preferences, we track them in real time. She turned to Elijah. Tell them about the system. Elijah tapped on his tablet, and the room's main screen lit up with a digital interface. This is where everything comes together, Elijah explained. Every interaction, lounge check-in, previous flights, dining choices is logged and updated in real time. Flight attendants will have discrete earpieces connected to an onboard AI assistant that can pull up information the moment a passenger requests something. A murmur spread through the room. This wasn't just customer service. This was intelligence. Darren Holt, the VP of Customer Relations, leaned against the wall, arms crossed. That's a lot of data management in a short time frame, he said. You really think passengers will go for this? Elijah met his gaze. We're not asking them to go for it. We're making it so seamless, they won't even realize it's happening. Darren exhaled. You've got guts, Kingsley. Elijah smiled. I prefer vision. With the strategy in place, execution moved at full speed. In the following weeks, the New York to London flagship aircraft was retrofitted with AI-integrated service panels. Flight attendants underwent intensive training, simulating real-time passenger scenarios. The lounge experience was quietly enhanced, with Kingsley's elite customers already experiencing subtle improvements in service. Elijah worked around the clock, knowing the board was watching. Jonathan Kingsley, however, remained silent, observing, waiting. But Elijah didn't need his father's validation. He needed results. And then, just as things were falling into place, a complication arose. 3 weeks before launch, Naomi stormed into the war room, tablet in hand. We have a problem, she announced. Elijah looked up from his notes. What is it? Naomi placed the tablet on the table. The screen displayed a breaking news article. Zenith Air announces exclusive first-class overhaul. Elijah's stomach tightened. Zenith Air, Kingsley's biggest competitor, was rolling out a new luxury service model. And their first target? New York to London. A direct attack. Naomi crossed her arms. They're calling it the Zenith Signature Experience. Personalized service. AI-driven customization. Basically, your entire concept. Elijah clenched his jaw. Someone had leaked their plans. And now, the battle wasn't just about proving himself to the board. It was about winning a war before it even started. He exhaled slowly, then looked at Naomi. Then we go faster. Naomi smirked. Now that's the Kingsley attitude. The race was on, and Elijah wasn't about to lose. The moment Zenith Air's announcement hit the news, the war for the New York to London route escalated. Inside Kingsley Aviation's war room, the tension was thick. Screens flashed with updates. Reports poured in. The competition had moved. Now, Elijah had no choice but to move faster. Naomi Carter tossed her tablet onto the table. They're copying everything: real-time personalization, AI-driven service, even pre-loaded passenger preferences. The only thing missing is a damn press conference announcing they stole our blueprint. Elijah didn't flinch. How fast can they deploy? Darren Holt, Kingsley's VP of Customer Relations, exhaled. Their official launch is 6 weeks away. Our trial run is in 3. Elijah's mind sharpened. Good. That means we'll be first. But Naomi wasn't convinced. You don't get it. Zenith isn't just launching a service. They're coming for us. This isn't just business, it's sabotage. Elijah's jaw tightened. He had expected resistance from within Kingsley Aviation, but he hadn't anticipated that an outside force would try to cripple his initiative before it even took off. And then came the final blow. Darren swiped across his tablet. "It's worse than you think," he muttered. "I ran a report. Over the past 2 weeks, we've lost 12 of our top-tier first-class passengers. Guess where they're going?" Naomi clenched her fists. Zenith. Elijah stared at the data. The names on the list weren't just passengers. They were influencers, CEOs, and high-profile clients. People whose decisions set industry trends. Zenith wasn't just preparing to compete. They were poaching Kingsley's elite customers before Elijah's new experience even had a chance to prove itself. For the first time since taking on this challenge, a flicker of doubt crept into Elijah's mind. Was he already too late? Later that evening, Elijah stood on the Kingsley Aviation rooftop terrace, the city lights of New York stretching beneath him. The door behind him opened. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. Jonathan Kingsley stepped beside him, hands in the pockets of his tailored coat. "You're losing passengers," Jonathan said simply. Elijah exhaled. "I know." Jonathan was silent for a moment, then spoke again. "Do you still think this can work?" It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't condescending. It was a real question. Elijah turned to face his father. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "But I need full control." Jonathan raised a brow. "You already have control." "No," Elijah countered. "I have permission. That's not the same thing." He gestured toward the city. "If we keep playing defense, we'll lose. I need to go on the offensive." Jonathan studied him for a long moment. Then, to Elijah's surprise, his father smirked. "Then do it." The next morning, Elijah stormed into the war room. His team looked up, waiting for news. "We're changing the plan," Elijah announced. Naomi frowned. "You're scrapping the launch?" "No," Elijah said. "We're accelerating it." Darren's eyes widened. "You want to launch in 2 weeks? That's insane." Elijah's expression was sharp. "Zenith thinks they can take our passengers before we're ready? Fine. Let's show them they're already behind." Naomi's lips slowly curled into a grin. Now that's the Kingsley spirit. In the next 48 hours, Elijah executed a 3-phase counterattack. 1. VIP retention strike. He personally called Kingsley Aviation's top-tier passengers. Not emails. Not automated messages. A direct call from the Kingsley heir himself. "Oh, you've been a valued passenger with us for years," he told them. "We have something exclusive launching in 2 weeks. I want you to be the first to experience it." Oh, he didn't beg them to stay. He made them feel chosen. Oh. By the end of the calls, 7 of the 12 lost passengers had committed to returning. 2. The blacklist move. Elijah instructed his team to quietly collect data on Zenith's poaching tactics. Oh, any Kingsley Lounge staff or concierge partners caught leaking information to Zenith. They were blacklisted from working with Kingsley Aviation again. Oh, it sent a clear message: loyalty mattered. And betrayal had consequences. 3. The ultimate power play, a mystery event invitation, was sent to Kingsley's top 50 first-class clients. Oh, no details. No press release. Just a simple note: something revolutionary is coming. You're invited to be the first to experience it. 2 weeks from today. Details to follow. The strategy worked. By the end of the week, whispers of Kingsley's secret luxury launch had spread. The tables had turned. Zenith had tried to steal Kingsley's elite. Now, those same passengers were waiting to see what Kingsley Aviation had planned. And Zenith? They were on the defensive. The war wasn't won yet. Elijah still had to deliver. 2 weeks. That was all the time he had left to execute perfection. He stood in the empty first-class cabin of Kingsley's newly upgraded aircraft, running his hands over the luxurious seats. This was it, the final phase, the test that would determine everything. Naomi stepped beside him, arms crossed. "Think you can pull it off, Kingsley?" Elijah exhaled, steady and confident. "I don't think," he said. "I know." The day had arrived. The war room was empty. The long nights of planning, strategizing, and fighting for control had all led to this moment. There were no more simulations, no more debates. Now, the passengers would decide who won. Elijah stood in the Kingsley Aviation VIP terminal at JFK Airport, his heartbeat steady. The private check-in lounge had been transformed for the occasion's sleek, intimate exclusive. Soft lighting, freshly brewed espresso, every detail designed to make each guest feel like they had just entered a world built specifically for them. One by one, the 50 hand-picked first-class passengers, billionaire tech CEOs, Hollywood elites, oil magnates. These weren't just customers. They were trendsetters. The people whose opinions shaped the entire and Zenith Air. Elijah had received reports that Zenith executives had personally reached out to some of these passengers, offering last-minute upgrades, incentives, anything, but none had accepted. They were here for they wanted to see what Kingsley Aviation had created. And Elijah was about to show them. The moment the first passengers stepped onto the jet, this wasn't first class. This was something else entirely. A dedicated concierge team greeted each passenger with their preferred drink, not based on a guess, but from meticulously tracked flight history. A CEO from Singapore was handed oolong tea with honey. A Hollywood director received. A New York investor was shown to his favorite seat. 3A. The passenger memory system. It wasn't just service. It was. Naomi stood by the boarding ramp, arms crossed as she watched everything unfold. You just rewired the entire first-class experience, she murmured. Elijah didn't respond. He didn't need to. As the aircraft soared above the Atlantic, the experience only deepened. Every meal, every interaction was curated to each passenger's unique tastes. A hedge fund manager who preferred to sleep immediately after takeoff was gently woken up with a warm towel and espresso exactly 3 hours before landing. An artist traveling for inspiration was offered a custom playlist on noise-canceling headphones, based on his favorite composers. A retired diplomat, known for his love of literature, found a rare signed edition of his favorite novel waiting at his seat. Every moment had been anticipated. No other airline could match this. Zenith Air had tried to copy Elijah's vision, but they thought it was about technology. They didn't realize it was about human instinct. By the time the flight landed in London, the outcome was clear. Passengers they were as they disembarked. A Saudi prince turned to Elijah and said, "I've flown every luxury airline in the world. But this feels like it was made just for me." A Hollywood producer pulled out his phone. "I want my entire team flying Kingsley from now on. Can we set that up?" A European venture capitalist shook Elijah's hand. "You just changed the game, Kingsley." As the last passenger stepped off the aircraft, Elijah remained seated, staring out the window. He had done it. Not just launched, he had won a war. Footsteps approached. He didn't turn. Jonathan Kingsley sat down across from him, silent for a moment. Then, finally, he spoke. "You understand now, don't you?" Elijah glanced at him. "Understand what?" His father's gaze was steady. "That power isn't given. It's earned." A long silence stretched between them. Then Jonathan did something unexpected. He smiled. Not the polite, distant smile of a CEO. A real, genuine congratulations, Jonathan said quietly. "You're ready." Elijah exhaled, the weight of everything settling over him. For the first time, he wasn't just he was, and the world had just witnessed it. 2 days later, they had been outmaneuvered. Passengers had spoken. The verdict was clear. Kingsley Aviation and Elijah Kingsley, he wasn't just an heir anymore. He was a legacy in the making. And that, my friends, is how Elijah Kingsley changed the future of luxury travel. From being judged in a first-class lounge to rewriting the rules of the airline industry, he proved that true power isn't given, it's earned. But now I want to hear from you. If you could experience a luxury flight anywhere in the world, where would you go? Let me know in the comments. And if you love this story, subscribe to the channel. More epic storytelling is coming your way, and you don't want to miss it. Tell me, Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. See you in the next one.